From the first page, I was hooked. Hi everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf, where we talk about books. Today I have my January wrap up for you. In addition, you can see I've gotten some new shelves. I finally upgraded so that my books actually fit into this space, this room, in a much more efficient way. The Kallax shelves that I had at the time, they were great, but they're more for storage and less for books. The depth of those shelves, it wasn't working. It took up a lot of space. I could barely walk in this room before, and now I have so much more room and extra shelf space for more books in the future. So I hope you like the new setup. It's more of a visual setup than anything, but I am so happy with this change. So let's just go ahead and jump into what I read in January. It was a bit of a mixed bag of books that I absolutely love to books that were not exactly what I was expecting, so let's break this down. The first book being Wrath from the Mountains by D.A. Smith. This is book 2 in the Bane Sword saga, and it is a Japanese-inspired self-published fantasy. Now, I did receive this copy in exchange for an honest review, and you can see my full spoiler-free thoughts in a separate video, which I'll link up in the cards. The story here being that Misako has brought Basho to its knees. The Lord Council has been shattered, but they won't stay that way for long. The capital of Orica is occupied by foreign forces. The god of greed turns its eyes to the realm of men, and the mountains awaken. The demons are coming. Continuing the story from The Blood of Outcasts, Misako finds that her vengeance has brought more than she could have bargained for. War, deceit, loss, and betrayal, these are all things that Misako must navigate in the sequel, and she must reap what her revenge has brought her. The big difference with Wrath from the Mountains compared to the first book, Blood of Outcasts, is that we actually get multi-POVs in this. So instead of this entire tale being told through Misako's POV only, we actually get to see POVs from characters we had met in the Blood of Outcasts, including a new character. Having the additional POVs was fantastic. It gave us a deeper look into the plot, along with more insight into the world building and magic system through all of these different characters. I was also surprised to find that the author's writing style seems to match the personalities of the characters themselves, which is really intriguing as you're reading along. I noticed there were slight differences between how Misako's POVs went versus Jinto's, for example. To me, this was impressive as the author was changing their writing style between the characters to better represent them. In terms of the writing style, I do still think that this will be one of those books that will not be for everyone, but I highly recommend giving it a try regardless to see if it's something you enjoy. In my review for The Blood of Outcasts, which was book 1, I mentioned that it did take me some time to settle into the writing style, but since settling into it and getting to know Misako's character and everything that D.A. Smith is building, I've been really enjoying it. Let's talk about Misako for a moment because I absolutely love her character. She's a complex character. Yes, she is unlikable, headstrong, she is quick to act, and she is a proud warrior. She often makes frustrating choices and can escalate a situation faster than she can draw her blade. Not only does this add tension to the story, but it adds a complexity to her character that I love because she gets development throughout this despite being the angry and unlikable person that she is. She's not an agreeable character. She does what she thinks is best and she will do it her way. And you don't always know what she's going to do, so that added level of unpredictability is something that I really appreciated. Despite all of this, we get to see her inner struggles and her growth throughout the story, giving a depth to her that I truly appreciated and wasn't expecting. In terms of the world building, like I mentioned, we get more depth into that. We see more of the gods, the demons, and more of the lands in this. I really enjoyed going into the magic system more, being able to learn about it, understand how it impacts our characters and the plot line a lot more in this was really helpful. Ultimately, with a broader look into the world and the magic system, this made for a much more immersive read. We also see new threats and a new culture introduced to the land of Basho. This adds new conflicts and new hurdles for Misako to overcome. There's a variety of different scenes in here, from political intrigue to incredible fight scenes. Overall, I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. From shock, sadness, intrigue, and hope, this book took me through them all. We have a complex character with difficult relationships, and all of it has me hooked. I'm really intrigued to see what happens in book 3, especially after the ending in this. And I just want to keep reading more about Masako's character. Next, I read The Wolf of Orenyaro by K.S. Villasolo. This was an interesting read. It was not what I expected. It was infuriating, complex, and yet intriguing. Let's break it down. I went into this thinking it would be an epic, action-packed fantasy with a headstrong lead female character who faces her problems head on. I quickly found myself in something altogether different. While this story is action-packed, it has political intrigue and mystery. It's a heavily character-driven story. As a character-driven reader, I was very excited for this, until I realized I was struggling with the characters and the story progression. The story is told through first-person narrative through the eyes of Queen Talien. While Queen Talien does carry some aspects of a strong female character, I found her to be quite immature and blinded by love, often making stupid choices that it made it hard to invest in her character or care about the circumstances. I can see where this would be a great character study, especially as this is the first book in the series. However, I couldn't help but be frustrated by her. Talien's choices, interactions, and lack of growth were all aspects that I struggled with in this. Now, like I mentioned, this is only book 1. There are other books in the series that follow this, and there is potential for her to get growth and more development. But it left me questioning, do I really want to sit through another 600 plus pages to find out if this one character gets development? Maybe. The potential for a great character arc and the possible satisfaction of that is enticing. The author manages to create a very emotionally vulnerable character that I was not anticipating and were well explored. It almost felt like an intrusion of the character's privacy, which is an incredible accomplishment. In terms of world building, it's well done. The readers get a solid view of the world's people and political strains. The magic system isn't fully explored until later on in the book, and it's done in an epic way that really left me wanting more. In addition, the last 25% of this did show great promise. The author demonstrates skill in both plotting and storytelling. With one high-stakes event after another, this felt episodic. It does a good job at keeping readers in suspense, but I did find myself wondering when we would finally make progress in the story. While there was lots of suspense, action, and high stakes throughout this story, I found myself struggling to get invested. I didn't really care for the characters or the plot. There were also repetitive themes in this that didn't work for me, including the miscommunication trope and a theme of stereotypical male antagonists. All that being said, I do think that there is promise with the author and the writing. Really, this felt like a soap opera dropped into a fantasy, and I do think that is one of the big reasons why I struggled with this. I am not sure if I will continue with this series yet or not. Like I said, I don't know if I want to sit through another 600 plus pages to find out if this character that I did not enjoy actually gets any development or if the story gets better. I have heard from others, from viewers who've been watching, that they did find that to be the case. The character does get development, does get better, and that does give me some hope. Overall, I give this 3 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I think there is promise here, and there were a lot of aspects that did interest me, from the world to the magic and the political strains that we see. It was more the characters that I struggled with and the circumstances that they're put into. The next book I read was Vagrant by Gabe Thompson. This is a self-published sci-fi, a novella, and book 1 in the Vagrant Chronicles. Now, I did receive an ebook for this in exchange for an honest review, and I was excited to get into this. It sounded really interesting. We're dealing with vagrants, people who live underground, away from the eye of the company who controls everything above ground in this futuristic version of Earth. We follow Logan, a vagrant. He is part of a people who hide from the eyes of the company underground. The company runs the planet and keeps order. They lace food with a product called Soper, which helps keep the public more compliant. Logan and other vagrants like him stay away from Soper-laced foods. They have their own society and just try to live their lives out of the control of the company. Shayna is one of the privileged who does live above ground, and she is allergic to Soper. Having most of her meals be Soper-free, she is one of the few clear-minded people above surface. These two teens meet and quickly fall in love. They also find themselves on an adventurous escape to find their friend and Logan's father, who had been captured by the company. Now, I want to start off by saying that this was an okay read for me. There were aspects that were really intriguing and that I liked, but there were also quite a few that didn't work for me. Vagrant is action-packed, adventurous, fast-paced, and set in a dystopia. It also has high-stakes, romance, and rescue missions all packed into 179 pages, making this a quick read. Unfortunately, the characters fell flat for me. I felt like the relationships weren't earned, their interactions could be superficial or awkward at times, and really, this is a plot-driven story. Being a character-driven reader, this just was not a good fit for me. In the end, this was an okay read. I ended up giving it 2 out of 5 stars. Next, I read A Gamble of Gods by Mitchell Faywood. This is book 1 in the Order of the Dragon series and a debut for this self-published author. This really felt like Indiana Jones meets Stargate in a spectacular debut that mixes both fantasy and sci-fi. Oftentimes after finishing a book, the enjoyment of it can wane over time. So far, that has not been the case with A Gamble of Gods. The more I think about it, the more I love it. The humor, the world building, quest, action, and the characters continue to grow on me. This multi-POV story follows 3 main characters as conflict brings them together. The story is told in first-person present tense narrative, giving you an intimate look into the characters' internal struggles, their thoughts, and motivations. One of the main characters we meet is a scholar and university professor, the other a famous treasure hunter, and finally an office worker struggling to find their place in the world. We're also treated to an intriguing and lovable side cast, along with some talking animal sidekicks. There's inclusion of anxiety and OCD, which brings its own hurdles to the plot along with the character's arc. While I loved many of the characters in this, there was one character that I found to be frustrating. This was more due to the type of personality and behavior that this character had. In the end, that just tells me how well the author did writing this character to be able to pull such frustration out of me. Overall, I really enjoyed the characters and the relationships that are built. In addition, the world immediately captivated me with seamless mixtures of fantasy and sci-fi and world-hopping adventures. This was such a satisfying blend of the genres, from planets that had varying levels of technologies to a pre-industrial planet where magic is the norm. The world, adventure, and politics reminded me of Stargate. Meanwhile, the treasure hunting character reminded me quite a lot of Indiana Jones. Ultimately, this combination created an incredibly captivating read for me. Something I think that's important to note is I did find that the first half of this book had a different tone to it compared to the second half. Where the first half of the book focuses on action, adventure, and mystery, the second half does include this, however, has a stronger focus on romance and relationships. While the tonal shift made sense for the story, the world, and characters, it took me a little while to settle into. However, by the time I was done reading it, the author did a great job weaving it all together. I personally love the tone of the first half of this book, whereas the second half was less to my reading taste. This was mainly due to the romance, which was well written, but is not my personal preference in genre. To put this into another perspective, I read the last 50% of this book in one sitting. So despite the genre change, the tone change, not being in my reading taste so much, I was still fully captivated and invested in the story enough to finish that second half in one day. So despite the tonal shift and the heavier focus on romance, this was still hard to put down. In the same theme of talking about important things to note, I did find that as I read, there were moments that I wanted to critique. However, I did find that the author addressed this later in the world building. So this is one of those books where, yes, you might have critiques going in, or you might notice things that you want a bit of closure on. The author does give that to you later on in the book. That being said, the tonal shift might be tricky for some readers, but overall would make a fantastic read for anyone who enjoys fantasy, sci-fi, adventure, romance, intriguing characters all mixed into an incredible world. A Gamble of Gods was impressive, it's captivating, and it was hard to put down. Overall, I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. The last book I read in January was an arc that I received from the author, and that was The Price of Power by Michael Michel. Bringing a strong new voice to grimdark fantasy, The Price of Power is an impressive debut that fans of Joe Abercrombie won't want to miss. This is a character-driven story told through multiple multiple points of views as war whispers throughout the land. From the first page, I was hooked. This story follows a mad prince believed to be dead, but rather is spending his day paying for the mistakes of his past, lost in drugs and drink. A young princess who must decide between her kingdom and her first love, a grandmother who must sacrifice her grandson, and a young man who is already dead. If they fail to pay the price, the world will be destroyed. Let's talk about the characters for a moment, because each of these characters gets development in one way or another, often in unexpected ways. With characters from young teenagers to the elderly, we see the relationships and their internal struggles laid bare to the reader. I can't forget to mention the morally gray characters, the strong female characters, and the compelling character arcs that kept me wanting more. I was thoroughly impressed with how thoughtfully the main cast and side cast of characters were written. With so much depth to the character's psychology, this kind of book is one that you could sit and analyze. As the title implies, there is a common theme amongst the POVs. Seeing the price of power from 4 different situations and POVs made for a captivating read. There was diversity and subtlety done with it, giving a balance to the character arcs and plotline which felt seamless. The world building naturally flowed with the story and was easy to get lost into. Rich in political tensions between the ruling lands, diverse cultures, dragon creatures, ascended beings, and a magic system with spiritual influences. There was a lot to this. However, I do wish there was more exploration of the magic system. This is a world with much more to discover in future books. Regarding pacing, this was a slow burn with a whirlwind of an ending. I'd recommend making some time to read the last 15% of this in one day or sitting if you can. This is also the kind of book that I want to go back and reread. Being the first book in a new series, I found that later on, after I was thinking about this, finishing the book, I realized that there were hints and nods to some of the things that had happened throughout the story, so I would love to go back, reread, and try and catch all of those hints. I also appreciated that the author was not afraid to include grimdark elements. This added a sense of dread and horror to the story, as I was never quite sure which character was going to be safe. Ultimately, this 700-page book was hard to put down. With captivating scenes, dangerous trials, political scheming, epic battles, animal companions, and pure madness, I was not disappointed. This was bloody, brutal, and brilliant. I ended up giving it 5 out of 5 stars, and I'd highly recommend it for any grimdark fantasy reader looking for their next read. And that is everything I read in January. Like I said, it was a bit of a mixed bag, some okay reads and some fantastic reads with some new favorites. I'd love to know, what did you read in January, or do any of these sound interesting to you? Have you read any of these already? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love hearing from you. As always, thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.